There is a configuration forming right now that peaks in 48 hours. The lunar eclipse at 12 degrees Virgo. I explained yesterday what an eclipse physically does, how Earth's shadow falls on the moon, how the removal of reflected light reveals what was hidden underneath. The mechanics are universal. They apply to everyone equally. But the expression of an eclipse is not universal. It is deeply personal. Because where the eclipse lands in your specific natal chart determines which area of your life gets the searchlight. Two people can experience the same eclipse and have completely different material surface. One person has a career revelation. Another has a health wake-up call. A third realizes a friendship has been running on borrowed time. Same eclipse, different houses, different lives being read by the same celestial event. Today I want to give you the map, your personal eclipse map, so that when March 3rd arrives, you are not wondering where to look. You already know. First, a quick orientation for those who are newer to chart reading. Your natal chart is divided into 12 houses. Each house governs a specific area of life. The first house is identity. The 7th is partnerships. The 10th is career, and so on. Which sign occupies which house depends on your rising sign, also called your ascendant. Your rising sign is the sign that was on the eastern horizon at the exact moment of your birth. It sets the framework for how the 12 signs distribute across your 12 houses. This is why a rising sign matters more than sun sign for transit work, and especially for eclipse work. Your sun sign tells you about your core identity. Your rising sign tells you about the structure of your life and where transits will land. I want to explain why this distinction matters, because it is the single most important upgrade most people can make in how they engage with astrology content. When you hear someone say Mercury retrograde affects Virgos or the eclipse is significant for Pisces, they are usually talking about sun signs. And sun sign astrology is not wrong. It is just low resolution. Like looking at a map of the world when you need a street map. Your sun sign gives you the continent. Your rising sign gives you the address. When an eclipse falls in Virgo, the area of life it activates depends entirely on where Virgo sits in your personal house system, and that is determined by your rising sign. Two Pisces sun signs can have completely different eclipse experiences, because one has Virgo in the 7th house, and the other has Virgo in the 3rd house. Same sun sign, same eclipse, entirely different territory being read. If you know your rising sign, you can follow what comes next directly. If you do not, there are free birth chart calculators available online. You need your birth date, birth time, and birth location. The birth time is the critical piece. Without it, the rising sign cannot be accurately determined. Take 10 minutes to find it. Pull your birth certificate. Ask a family member. The specificity it provides is worth the effort. If you absolutely cannot find your birth time, you can still follow the general themes by listening for the house description that resonates most strongly with what has been showing up in your life this week. The eclipse will tell you which house it is activating, even if you cannot confirm it through chart mechanics. Now here's how to find your eclipsed house using your rising sign. The eclipse is at 12 degrees Virgo. Wherever Virgo falls in your chart is where the eclipse lands. I'm going to walk through all 12 rising signs and tell you which house Virgo occupies for each. This is the simplified method. If you have an intercepted chart or equal house system, you may need to adjust slightly. But for most people, this mapping holds. If your rising sign is Virgo, the eclipse falls in your first house. Identity, self-image, how you present yourself to the world. The eclipse is reading your relationship with yourself. The version of you that has been maintained by habit or others' expectations rather than genuine alignment is what gets illuminated. The question the eclipse asks you is straightforward. Who are you when the reflected light goes away? What remains of your identity when you stop performing it? If your rising sign is Leo, the eclipse falls in your second house. Money, resources, self-worth, what you value and what you have built materially. The eclipse reads your financial and resource structures, income sources that are no longer aligned, spending patterns maintained by inertia. But deeper than money, this is about worth. The eclipse asks what you value because it actually sustains you versus what you value because someone told you it was valuable. If your rising sign is Cancer, the eclipse falls in your third house. Communication, siblings, neighbors, short trips, daily mental environment. The eclipse reads the information streams in your life, the conversations that have become rituals rather than exchanges, the media you consume without questioning, the sibling or neighbor dynamic that has been running on an old script. Given Mercury retrograde in the same sky, this house placement amplifies the communication theme significantly. If your rising sign is Gemini, the eclipse falls in your fourth house. Home, family, foundations, roots, the deepest layer. The eclipse reads the structures you built your life on. Family dynamics maintained by obligation rather than genuine connection. A living situation that served you once and constrains you now. The relationship with a parent or caregiver that has been unexamined for years. The fourth house is where we are most resistant to change because it is where we feel most vulnerable. The eclipse does not care about your resistance. It shows what is there. If your rising sign is Taurus, the eclipse falls in your fifth house. Creativity, romance, children, joy, self-expression. The eclipse reads how you create and how you love. Creative projects that have been maintained past their natural endpoint. Romantic patterns that repeat because they are familiar rather than because they are nourishing. A relationship with pleasure and joy that has become transactional rather than genuine. The fifth house asks what brings you alive, and the eclipse shows you what has been pretending to. If your rising sign is Aries, the eclipse falls in your sixth house. Health, daily work, routines, service, the infrastructure of everyday life. This is the house Virgo naturally rules, so the eclipse here is especially potent. The eclipse reads your systems, the health habit you have been avoiding addressing, the work routine that drains more than it produces, the daily structure that looks functional from outside but feels hollow from within. Virgo eclipses in the sixth house do not mess around. They show you exactly what in your daily infrastructure needs to be rebuilt, not renovated, rebuilt from honest materials. If your rising sign is Pisces, the eclipse falls in your seventh house. Partnerships, marriage, business contracts, open enemies. The other person in your life. The eclipse reads your one-to-one relationships. The partnership that has been running on an old agreement. The contract that no longer reflects reality. The dynamic where you give too much or take too much and both of you pretend it is balanced. With the sun in your first house during this eclipse, the polarity is stark. Your identity illuminated by the sun, your partnership read by the eclipse. The question is whether the relationship can hold when both people see clearly. If your rising sign is Aquarius, the eclipse falls in your 8th house. Shared resources, debt, inheritance, transformation, the hidden exchanges. The eclipse reads what you share with others and what it costs you. Financial entanglements that have become controlling, emotional debts that have never been acknowledged, power dynamics in intimate relationships that operate below the surface. The 8th house is where we hide the things we are most afraid to look at. The eclipse brings a flashlight. If your rising sign is Capricorn, the eclipse falls in your 9th house. Beliefs, higher education, long-distance travel, philosophy, the big picture. The eclipse reads your worldview, beliefs that were adopted rather than earned through experience, educational paths that serve status rather than understanding, a philosophy of life that is calcified into dogma rather than remaining a living inquiry. The 9th house eclipse asks what you believe because you have tested it versus what you believe because you were told to. If your rising sign is Sagittarius, the eclipse falls in your 10th house. Career, public role, reputation, authority, what you are building in the world. The eclipse reads your professional life and public image. The career trajectory that looks successful from outside but feels misaligned from inside. The reputation that was built for someone you used to be rather than someone you are becoming. The authority you carry that you did not earn or no longer want. 10th house eclipses are visible. Other people notice when something shifts here. That can feel exposing. It is also clarifying. If your rising sign is Scorpio, the eclipse falls in your 11th house. Community, friendships, goals, networks, the people around you. The eclipse reads your social landscape. Friendships that have been maintained by proximity rather than genuine affinity. Group affiliations that no longer represent your values. Goals you set from a previous version of yourself that the current version has outgrown. The 11th house eclipse asks who your people actually are and which goals are still yours. If your rising sign is Libra, the eclipse falls in your 12th house. The hidden, the subconscious, patterns that operate below awareness, isolation, retreat. The eclipse reads what you cannot see about yourself. This is the most mysterious eclipse placement because the 12th house material is, by definition, what you are blind to. 12th house eclipses often manifest as external events that force internal recognition. Something happens in the world that triggers an awareness of a pattern you have been running unconsciously. The dream life intensifies. Synchronicities multiply. The boundary between conscious and unconscious becomes thinner. If the eclipse is in your 12th house, pay extra attention to dreams and seemingly random encounters between now and March 10th. The pattern is there. You just have to let the unconscious show it to you on its terms. Now here's a layer most eclipse content skips. The house opposite the eclipse is equally important. While the moon is being eclipsed in Virgo, the sun is shining in Pisces in the opposite house. The eclipsed house shows you what needs to end, be released, or be restructured. The sun house shows you what is trying to grow. They work as a pair. If the eclipse reads your 6th house of daily systems, the sun illuminates your 12th house of hidden patterns, suggesting that the system upgrade is connected to an unconscious pattern you have not yet acknowledged. If the eclipse reads your 7th house of partnerships, the sun illuminates your 1st house of identity, suggesting that the relationship shift is connected to your own evolution. Always read both houses. The release and the growth are connected. 3 signals that the eclipse is actively working in your chart over the next 10 days. I have tracked these across multiple eclipse seasons, and they are remarkably consistent, regardless of which house is activated. The signals differ in content, but not in kind. First, something you have been tolerating suddenly becomes intolerable. Not gradually, suddenly. The tolerance evaporates. What you could ignore yesterday, you cannot ignore tomorrow. That is the borrowed light being removed. The thing was always this problematic. You were just viewing it through a filter that softened the edges. When the filter drops, the edges are sharp and undeniable. Pay attention to the first moment of intolerance. It usually arrives within 72 hours of the exact eclipse, and it usually points directly at the house material being activated. If your toleration breaks around a work routine, the 6th house is live. If it breaks around a relationship dynamic, the 7th house is live. The intolerance is the eclipse's first signal. Second, a choice that felt complicated simplifies. Not because the circumstances changed, but because the filter changed. What seemed like a dilemma with the old illumination becomes obvious under eclipse light. The answer was always there. You were just seeing it through too many layers. I cannot overstate how common this is during eclipse windows. People who have been stuck on a decision for months report that the decision suddenly resolves itself. Not through new information, through the removal of interference. The noise drops, and the signal becomes clear. If a decision suddenly simplifies between now and March 10th, act on the simplified version. That is the eclipse reading completing its work. Third, something ends. A habit, a conversation topic, a pattern, a way of doing things. And the ending does not feel like loss. It feels like exhaling, like setting down a bag you forgot you were carrying. The relief of the ending is how you know the eclipse did its work. What needed to go was already trying to leave. The eclipse just opened the door. If you experience this particular signal, the exhale of release, do not try to pick the thing back up after the relief fades. The eclipse showed you it was ready to leave. Trust the reading. The eclipse hits Tuesday, March 3rd, and I will be here walking you through it in real time. Tomorrow is Eclipse Eve. The energy between now and Tuesday has a specific texture that I want to prepare you for, because Eclipse Eves are when the anxiety peaks and the last waves of the old pattern try to reassert themselves. I have seen this across every eclipse season I have tracked. The day before is harder than the day of. The resistance to the ending concentrates in the final hours. Knowing that helps, and tomorrow I will tell you exactly what to expect. Here is where it lands. You now have your house. You know where the eclipse searchlight is pointed. You know what area of life is being read. You know to look at the opposite house for the growth direction. And you know the 3 signals that tell you the eclipse is working. That is your map. Use it. Write down your house and what you think the eclipse might be reading. Not what you want it to find, what you suspect it will find. The things you have been tolerating, the filter you have been looking through, the borrowed light that has made something look different from what it is. Write it down before Tuesday, because after the eclipse, the filter changes and you will want to compare. That is the practice. Observation before, observation during, observation after. That is how you turn an eclipse from something that happens to you into something you read. Stay with me through the eclipse window. We are almost there.